At 4:22 a.m. on March 31st, 1945, a British sailor on watch duty off the coast of the Netherlands saw something that shouldn't exist. He was standing on the deck of a cargo ship. The air was cold, the sky was still dark, with just a little light starting to show in the east. He was tired. He'd been standing there for 3 hours, watching the water, watching the sky. Then he saw it, a shape in the clouds, getting bigger, coming toward them. At first he thought it was a German bomber. That made sense. The Luftwaffe still had planes. They still attacked Allied ships when they could. He reached for the alarm, ready to shout. But then the shape got closer and he stopped. Something was wrong. The plane was coming in low, maybe 200 feet above the water. It was a Junkers Ju-88. He recognized the silhouette. A twin-engine bomber. German. But there was something sitting on top of it. Another plane. A smaller one, attached to the bomber's back like some kind of parasite. He squinted. The light was bad, but he could see it clearly now. 2 planes, flying as one. He called out to the others. 2 more sailors ran over. They stared up at the sky. "What is that?" one of them said. Nobody answered. Planes kept coming. They were moving fast, diving at an angle. The sailor could hear the engines now, a deep, steady roar that got louder with every second. And then, maybe 300 yards out, something happened. The smaller plane on top pulled away. It separated from the bomber and climbed sharply, banking to the left. The sailor watched it go, confused, but the bomber didn't follow. It kept coming, straight at them. The sailor's stomach dropped. He realized what he was looking at. The bomber wasn't slowing down. It wasn't pulling up. And now that the top plane was gone, he could see something else. The cockpit was empty. No pilot. No crew. Just glass and darkness. The bomber was flying itself. He opened his mouth to scream, but the sound didn't come fast enough. The Junkers hit the water 50 yards from the ship. The impact was massive. A white explosion of spray and foam shot up into the air. The water lifted and surged outward in a wave that rocked the cargo ship hard to one side. But there was no fire, no secondary explosion. The bomber had missed. The sailor gripped the railing and stared at the place where the plane had gone under. His heart was pounding. His hands were shaking. He looked up and saw the smaller plane, the fighter, already far away, turning back toward the German coast. One of the other sailors said, "Did you see that?" The sailor nodded. He didn't try. At 4:22 a.m. on March 31st, 1945, a British sailor on watch duty off the coast of the Netherlands saw something that shouldn't exist. He was standing on the deck of a cargo ship. The air was cold. The sky was still dark, with just a little light starting to show in the east. He was tired. He'd been standing there for 3 hours watching the water, watching the sky. Then he saw it, a shape in the clouds, getting bigger, coming toward them. At first he thought it was a German bomber. That made sense. The Luftwaffe still had planes. They still attacked Allied ships when they could. He reached for the alarm, ready to shout. But then the shape got closer and he stopped. Something was wrong. The plane was coming in low, maybe 200 feet above the water. It was a Junkers Ju-88. He recognized the silhouette, a twin-engine bomber, German. But there was something sitting on top of it. Another plane, a smaller one, attached to the bomber's back like some kind of parasite. He squinted. The light was bad, but he could see it clearly now. 2 planes, flying as one. He called out to the others. 2 more sailors ran over. They stared up at the sky. "What is that?" one of them said. Nobody answered. The planes kept coming. They were moving fast, diving at an angle. The sailor could hear the engines now, a deep, steady roar that got louder with every second. And then, maybe 300 yards out, something happened. The smaller plane on top pulled away. It separated from the bomber and climbed sharply, banking to the left. The sailor watched it go, confused. But the bomber didn't follow. It kept coming, straight at them. The sailor's stomach dropped. He realized what he was looking at. The bomber wasn't slowing down. It wasn't pulling up. And now that the top plane was gone, he could see something else. The cockpit was empty. No pilot. No crew. Just glass and darkness. The bomber was flying itself. He opened his mouth to scream, but the sound didn't come fast enough. The Junkers hit the water 50 yards from the ship. The impact was massive. A white explosion of spray and foam shot up into the air. The water lifted and surged outward in a wave that rocked the cargo ship hard to one side. But there was no fire. No secondary explosion. The bomber had missed. The sailor gripped the railing and stared at the place where the plane had gone under. His heart was pounding. His hands were shaking. He looked up and saw the smaller plane, the fighter, already far away, turning back toward the German coast. One of the other sailors said, "Did you see that?" The sailor nodded. He didn't trust his voice yet. There was no one in it. There was no one flying that thing. The sailor turned and looked at him. "I know." They stood there in silence, waiting for the sun to come up. By the time the report reached Allied intelligence, 3 more ships had seen the same thing, a pair of planes flying together, the smaller one pulling away, the bomber diving into the sea, or into the hull of a ship, without a pilot. The officers didn't know what to call it. Some called it a suicide plane, others called it a flying bomb. But the sailors who'd seen it up close had a different name. They called it the Headless bomber, and nobody knew how to stop it. The Germans had been working on the idea for over a year. It started in 1943, when the war was starting to turn. The Allies were pushing into Europe, the Luftwaffe was losing planes faster than they could replace them. Fuel was running low, pilots were exhausted, and the bombers they had left weren't enough to break through Allied defenses. Someone in the high command had an idea. What if they didn't need a pilot in the bomber? What if they turned the bomber itself into a weapon? The concept was simple. Take a Junkers Ju-88, a reliable, heavy bomber, and strip out everything inside. Remove the crew seats, remove the guns, remove anything that wasn't necessary. Then fill the entire fuselage with explosives, 3.5 tons of it. But how do you fly a plane with no pilot? That was the problem. Remote control systems existed, but they weren't reliable. Radio signals could be jammed. Guidance systems could fail. They needed something better. So they came up with something stranger. They would attach a second plane on top of the bomber, a fighter plane, usually a Messerschmitt Bf-109 or a Focke-Wulf FW-190. The fighter pilot would control both planes. He'd fly them together as one unit all the way to the target. When he got close enough, he'd aim the bomber at the enemy ship, lock the controls, and then release it. The bomber would keep flying in a straight line, diving toward the target like a massive guided missile, and the fighter pilot would pull away and fly home. They called it the Mistel. In German, it means mistletoe, the plant that grows on top of another plant, but to the Allies, it looked like something else. It looked like a nightmare.
The pilot flew in low, aimed the bomber, and released it. The bomber hit the bridge dead center. The explosion tore through the stone and metal, collapsing the entire structure into the river. The bridge was gone. The Allies rebuilt it in 3 days, but the Germans didn't care. The weapon worked. That was all that mattered. After that, the Mistel program expanded. More units were formed, more targets were chosen, and more Allied sailors started seeing the headless bombers coming out of the sky. The problem was detection. Allied radar could pick up German bombers from miles away. That gave ships time to prepare, time to turn, time to fire back. But the Mistel changed that. When a radar operator saw 2 planes flying together, it looked like a normal formation. 2 German aircraft, maybe a bomber with a fighter escort, nothing unusual. By the time anyone realized what they were actually seeing, it was too late. The fighter had already pulled away, the bomber was already diving, and there was no pilot to kill. No crew to scare off with anti-aircraft fire. You were just watching 3.5 tons of explosives fall toward you, and there was nothing you could do. Lieutenant Commander James Holloway was on the bridge of a destroyer when he saw his first Mistel. It was April 12, 1945, late afternoon. The destroyer was part of a convoy moving supplies up the coast toward Bremen. The sky was overcast. Visibility was poor. Holloway was drinking coffee when the radar operator called out. 2 contacts, sir, bearing 270, range 8 miles. Holloway set down his cup and walked over to the radar screen. He could see the 2 dots clearly. They were moving fast, coming in low. Fighters or bombers, he asked. Hard to say, sir, flying close together. Holloway nodded. Sound general quarters, get the guns ready. The alarm went off. Men ran to their stations. The destroyer's anti-aircraft guns swiveled toward the incoming aircraft. Holloway picked up his binoculars and scanned the horizon. He saw them a minute later. 2 planes, one on top of the other. He frowned. What the hell is that? Nobody answered. The planes kept coming. They were maybe 3 miles out now. Close enough that Holloway could see details. The bottom plane was big. A bomber. Junkers, probably. The top plane was smaller, a fighter. And then, as he watched, the fighter pulled up. It separated from the bomber and climbed sharply, rolling to the right. Holloway followed it with his binoculars for a second, confused. When he looked back down, the bomber was still there. Still coming. Still diving. Open fire, Holloway shouted. The guns started up immediately. A storm of tracer rounds lit up the sky, all of them tracking toward the incoming bomber. Holloway could see the shells hitting. Pieces of metal flew off the wings. The fuselage sparked and smoked, but the plane didn't stop. It didn't slow down. It just kept coming. Holloway realized what was happening. He grabbed the railing and yelled, hard to port, full speed. The destroyer started to turn. The deck tilted beneath his feet. The engines roared. The bomber was 200 yards away, then 100, then 50. Holloway watched it come. He could see straight into the cockpit now. Empty. No one there. Just broken glass and shadow. The plane hit the water 30 yards from the destroyer's starboard side. The explosion was massive. A column of white water shot up into the air higher than the ship's mast. The shockwave hit the destroyer like a fist, throwing Holloway against the wall of the bridge. His ears rang, his vision blurred. When he looked up, the water was still falling. It came down in sheets, soaking the deck, flooding the gun stations. But the ship was intact. The Mistel had missed. Holloway got to his feet slowly. His hands were shaking. He looked out at the water where the bomber had gone under, and then up at the sky where the fighter was already gone. One of his officers came up beside him. "Sir, are you all right?" Holloway nodded. He didn't trust his voice yet. "What was that?" the officer asked. Holloway wiped the water off his face. "I don't know," he said, "but we need to report it." By May 1945, Allied intelligence had collected enough information to understand what they were dealing with. The reports all said the same thing. 2 planes. One manned, one unmanned. The unmanned plane filled with explosives, the manned plane guiding it to the target and then pulling away at the last second. They called it a composite aircraft. The Germans called it Mistel, and it was more dangerous than anyone wanted to admit. The Mistel didn't just threaten ships. It could target bridges, dams, fuel depots, anything large and stationary. And because the bomber was unmanned, the Germans didn't lose pilots when it exploded. They only lost the plane itself. That made it cheap, efficient, deadly. Allied command sent out an order to all ships. If you see 2 planes flying as one, assume it's a Mistel. Don't wait to identify it. Don't wait to see if it's hostile. Just shoot it down. But that was easier said than done. The Mistel flew low, under radar coverage when it could. It came in fast. And by the time you saw it clearly enough to know what it was, you only had seconds to react. Some ships got lucky. Some didn't. On April 16, 1945, a British cargo ship was hit off the Dutch coast. The Mistel struck it just below the waterline. The explosion tore open the hull. The ship went down in less than 10 minutes. 42 men died. On April 24th, a Mistel hit a fuel depot outside Hamburg. The explosion started a fire that burned for 3 days. On May 2nd, another one targeted a railway bridge near Magdeburg. It missed by 50 feet, but the explosion was so big it cracked the foundation.
The bridge collapsed 2 hours later. The attacks kept coming, and every time the same thing happened. The fighter pilot would fly in, aim the bomber, release it, and disappear. No one ever saw him. No one ever caught him. All they saw was the headless bomber falling out of the sky. The German pilots who flew the Mistel knew the risks. If something went wrong during the release, both planes could crash. If the fighter didn't pull away fast enough, the explosion could catch it. If Allied fighters spotted them before they reached the target, they were sitting ducks. The Mistel was slow, it was clumsy, and once the fighters separated, the pilot was alone, flying a single-engine plane deep into enemy territory with no support. Some of them didn't make it back, but the ones who did were treated like heroes. The Luftwaffe celebrated them. The propaganda machine used their stories to boost morale. One pilot, the broadcast said, one plane, one strike, and the enemy has no answer. It wasn't entirely true. The Allies were learning. They were adapting. But it sounded good, and for a while it worked. The war was ending, and everyone knew it. By late April 1945, Berlin was surrounded. The Red Army was pushing in from the east, American and British forces were closing in from the west, the Third Reich was collapsing. But the Mistel program didn't stop. In fact, it got bigger. The Luftwaffe had one last plan. They called it Operation Eisenhammer, Iron Hammer. The target wasn't ships or bridges or fuel depots, it was Soviet power plants. The idea was simple but desperate. If they could knock out the electrical grid in key Soviet cities, they could slow down the Red Army's advance, buy more time, maybe force a negotiation. It was a long shot, everyone knew that, but the alternative was surrender. So they kept flying. On April 28, 1945, a Mistel unit took off from an airfield near Prague. There were 6 aircraft in total, 3 composite pairs. Each bomber was loaded with explosives. Each fighter pilot knew exactly where he was supposed to go. The targets were power stations near Leningrad and Moscow. The pilots flew east, staying low to avoid radar. The weather was bad. Heavy clouds, rain in some places. That was good. It made them harder to spot. They flew for 2 hours. At 9:30 p.m., they reached the first checkpoint, a river that marked the edge of Soviet-controlled territory. The lead pilot checked his map, confirmed the location, and signaled the others to continue. They were deep in enemy airspace now. If Soviet fighters found them, they wouldn't make it back. But no fighters came. They kept flying. The first pair reached their target at 10:15 p.m., a power station just outside Leningrad. He could see it from miles away, a cluster of buildings, smokestacks, electrical towers lit up against the dark countryside. He descended to 2,000 feet, lined up the bomber, checked the angle, then he locked the controls and hit the release. The bomber separated cleanly. It kept flying straight, diving at a shallow angle toward the power station. The pilot pulled up hard, banking to the left. He didn't look back. He just climbed, pushed the throttle forward, and headed west, as fast as his plane could go. Behind him, the bomber hit. The explosion lit up the sky. A massive fireball rose into the air, throwing smoke and debris in every direction. The power station disappeared. The lights went out across a 10-mile radius. The pilot was already 5 miles away when it happened. He felt the shockwave, a dull thump that rattled his cockpit, but he didn't slow down. He just kept flying. The second pair wasn't as lucky. They reached their target, a station near Moscow, but Soviet anti-aircraft guns were waiting. The gunners had been warned. They'd seen the reports from the west. They knew what to look for. When the Mistel came in low, they opened fire. The pilot saw the tracer rounds coming up at him. He tried to adjust, tried to get lower, but the bomber was too heavy, too slow. A shell hit the bomber's left wing, then another hit the fuselage. The pilot knew he couldn't make the approach. He released the bomber early, hoping it would still reach the target on its own. It didn't. The bomber lost altitude fast. It hit the ground half a mile short of the power station, in an open field. The explosion was huge, but it didn't matter. The station was untouched. The pilot climbed and turned west. He could see Soviet fighters in the distance now, closing in. He pushed his engine as hard as it could go. He made it back to German lines, but just barely. His plane was hit 3 times. One round went through the canopy, missing his head by inches. When he landed, he sat in the cockpit for a long time before he could move. The third pair never reached their target. Somewhere over Poland, the fighter's engine started to fail. The pilot tried to keep going, but the bomber was too much weight. He couldn't climb. He couldn't maintain speed. He had 2 choices: release the bomber and try to save himself, or stay attached and go down with it. He released it. The bomber fell into a forest and exploded. The fighter kept going for another 10 miles before the engine gave out completely. The pilot bailed out. He parachuted into the woods and walked for 2 days before Soviet soldiers found him. He never saw Germany again. Operation Eisenhammer didn't work. The power stations that were hit were back online within days. The ones that weren't hit kept running without interruption. The Red Army didn't slow down. Berlin fell on May 2nd. Hitler was dead. The government was gone. And the Mistel program ended with it. In total, the Germans built around 250 Mistel composite aircraft.
Most of them never saw combat. Some were destroyed on the ground by Allied bombers, others were abandoned when their airfields were overrun. The ones that did fly had mixed results. Some hit their targets, some missed. Some were shot down before they could release. Allied records show that at least 15 ships were damaged or sunk by Mistel attacks. Dozens of bridges, depots, and buildings were destroyed. Hundreds of sailors and soldiers were killed. But in the end, it didn't change anything. The war was lost. The Mistel couldn't save Germany. It couldn't turn the tide. It was just one more desperate attempt to hold on to something that was already slipping away. After the war, the Allies captured several intact Mistel units. Engineers studied them, tested them, tried to understand how they worked. The technology was impressive, the concept was bold, but it was also limited. The Mistel required skilled pilots, clear weather, and vulnerable targets. It was expensive to build and difficult to deploy, and most importantly, it was a weapon of desperation. The Allied engineers documented everything they found and then moved on. The Mistel was filed away as a footnote, a strange idea from a dying regime. But the sailors who'd seen it never forgot. For them, the memory stayed sharp. The image of that headless bomber diving out of the sky with no one inside, no one to stop it, no way to know if it would hit or miss. It was the kind of thing that stayed with you, even after the war ended, even after the wreckage was cleared and the reports were written and the dead were buried. The headless bomber was still there, somewhere in the back of their minds, falling, always falling,